So we're going to ask you um, to keep your cameras on if you're comfortable with that, um, and to stay muted uh, until we do question and answer, which will be at approximately 11:45. Though Kenny and I, we did have a brief discussion about what we're going to say today, but mostly it is going to happen in whatever way it happens. It's going to unfold. So there is no script. Funny, not people not saying anything. We're in a void here, Kenny. Okay, it is 11, so let us begin. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for being here. We are pretty excited about sharing some of what we've been thinking about for a long time. We're going public. Uh, so yeah, Kenny and I, we should just begin with a little bit about us, and then we'll do a little bit of the housekeeping stuff. But let's just begin with, you want to say a little bit about your artistic life, Kenny, and what you've done so that people know?
Sure. About maybe more than 15 years ago, I started doing stand-up comedy and then doing a handful of plays. And then people suggested going over to the Marsh to work on solo performance because I was interested in both comedy and drama, and then trying to do them separately was just too much of a time investment. And there, I worked with David Ford. I'm sure there are many people in here today who've started with David Ford, or you, Charlie. And I worked on a solo show, got my first run, which I was not prepared for at the time. I think I could have worked on it a little bit more, and I mentioned that because that could be one of the themes today. And then during the March's Performance Initiative #2, I was paired with Charlie Varon as my director, and we worked on a piece that developed. And a couple years after that, I went through my first major significant loss. My former and first partner had passed away, and I was not able to really share my experiences about grief. But I cornered Charlie outside of the marsh and started just blabbing, because that's how I just blabbing, blabbing, blabbing about grief and loss and death. Like, no, how are you? What a nice day it's been. Just blabbing, blabbing. And Charlie said, "Why don't you come assist and teach with me?" And it was just so random. I have no idea like how that connected together. And then that started my journey with teaching with Charlie. That was about 15 years ago. We taught I did an apprenticeship with Charlie, and then that turned into co-teaching. We taught at the Marsh for 10 years, and that has truly been one of the best experiences of my life. I teach independently on my own, but that core way of teaching solo performance and directing, that was all learned with Charlie Varon, which we know comes from the Marsh, and also uh, from David Ford as well. That took longer than 2 minutes, Charlie. Sorry.
So yeah, we did. I mean, the teaching together that we have done has been one of the great gifts of my work life because um, obviously there's some way in which we are compatible and we learn from each other, and we were able to develop some thinking about how to teach solo performance, how solo performance works, what storytelling means at this moment in our culture. To back up for me, I mean, I think it's been exactly 50 years since I did my first performing of my own work. Well, actually, it was co-written with my friend Mark Fisher back in high school, little comic skits. To skip ahead, in 1991, I did my first solo show, and since then I've done many. Had my many ups, many downs, a lot of luck. In 1994, I did a show called Rush Limbaugh and Night School at the Marsh, which became a runaway hit, and I took it to off Broadway in Washington, D.C. Um, and that experience, doing a show a couple hundred times, certainly changed me and shaped the way I understand things. With that kind of repetition, you begin to just by the quantity of performances, you learn something about relationship with audience and also what is it like to show up night after night through the ups and the downs. Um, and then the next show I did was an ensemble piece that I wrote called Ralph Nader is Missing in 1997. And then in 2000, I did a solo piece called The People's Violin. And each time trying to move the form forward, play with stuff. Those two shows, Ralph Nader is Missing and People's Violin, are in some way the reason we are here. Um, because they took me places I had not expected to go. Artistically, wonderful, emotionally, wrenching. Um, Not only wrenching, but wonderful in many ways. But they forced me to look at certain questions about what it is to be an artist, what it is to stand up on a stage, um, and that's a lot of what set me on this path of trying to think about uh, these elements. And Kenny and I talked about for years, we talked about should we do some kind of workshop called The Inner Life of the Solo Performer. And this is that, boiled down to half an hour, 40 minutes. Um, so we're pretty excited to at least get started on this. Okay, so now quickly, what we plan to do. We're going to talk for about 30 minutes and just see where it leads us. You're kind of dropping into the middle of a conversation we've been having for 10 years, more really. And I also want to just acknowledge that David Ford is key to all of what we do. We have learned so much from him, and David and I are still collaborating. We've passed the 30-year anniversary of our collaboration. So, and there are many of you who've been part of this creative journey in many ways, and we just want to acknowledge and thank you for what you have given to this conversation. So you're on mute. Don't use the chat, please. Let's just stay focused. Chat has its place, but we're not doing chat. Yeah, keep your camera on, stay muted if you can. And yeah, stay muted. And if you can, keep your camera on. Anything else I've left out?
I think that's all.
Okay. And then, oh yeah, so at some point when we've run out of words, we will open it to Q&A and you can supply some words and we'll see where it leads. Okay, good. I'm going to start with a little video. There you are. Can you see the video? Well, as usual, I'm having trouble with the tech. Share. There we go. Here we go. Does that look okay, Kenny?
Looks good. We're ready.
Forgive the lapse.
So what I'm hearing is that you're saying that there's a very positive element to the word shame. I've never ever considered this. Could you elaborate a bit on
to be shameless is to be very, very dangerous, I think. in America. Our president at the moment is a shameless person. I don't know. Maybe it's. I know it's definitely a Christian emotion, though, and that's why it's so so out of fashion. But I always thought it quite productive in the Gospels. The idea that you assume that you are entirely in sin. I always assume that because it's almost always true. There's so many kind of small vanities, and I don't know. We're always boasting or trying to put something over on somebody, or that seems to be our daily practice. So I think to have in your mind the idea that you're probably not as great as you think you are is a useful thought. I find it useful anyway. Writing is all shame. I was out with a load of writers yesterday, and everybody feels ashamed when they write. It's a shameful practice. Like, who are you to write 400 pages about anything? Why should anybody have to read them? It's every moment of it is shameful. Also, the exposure, if it is, if you write intimately, which all writing, even if it's a distant historical novel, is from your brain, it's your ideas. So it's like being exposed in front of people, and it's often quite shy people who write. So there's a strange conflict there. You see it in comedians too, stand-up comedians. My brother's one, where they're not extrovert people. You know, if you met them in a pub, they're kind of quiet and cautious and scared of life, but then they go on stage and say all these outrageous things. I think it's a strange psychological quirk in which shame is used to kind of propel you on to something.
Okay, that's Zadie Smith. Kenny, any thoughts as you listen to that this time?
I'm thinking about the last full-length piece that I had developed with you, Charlie. It was right after my mother's death. I was in a difficult place. I was feeling like grief and loss is not something I could really share. That I felt like what I was hearing was like a common cultural expectation to just move on, especially after a year and 5 stages. And again, Charlie, here's the theme of me working with you when there's somehow loss that motivates it. And I already had a lot of kind of shame about like, why am I not over this? Why do I need to talk about this? Why do I need to create something that has some aesthetic form to it? And it was, and I had even some challenging experiences trying to share some of it within our solo performance community. Grief can be very activating to people. Maybe they have not looked at their own loss or for whatever reason. And I I remember just being angry. That was the outside mask of my unprocessed or unfelt grief, was this anger. And it was covering a lot of shame of why I'm not over it and why do I need to put this out there. And I think, Charlie, you just really held it. You actually helped me with some tools from the Jewish tradition where I could actually mourn on my own and then come to you with something in the writing form. And so there was so much like charge to it and so much just messiness for me. And working with you privately and in small trusted groups, even in your living room in Noe Valley, I was able to start getting some aesthetic distance from it. And then the shame of why am I still grieving? And like, people don't want to hear this and I'm torturing people. It then luckily transferred over to some shame of like, is this writing good enough? Is the performance good enough? But you had created a trusted space with it. And I think that was very helpful. And then the first time I presented it at Bruce Pac-Man is here. Hi, Bruce. At his solo Sundays at Stageworks. Um, I remember telling myself like a couple minutes before it was my turn, I the words were, I am never doing this again with an F word inserted in there. And like, who was I fooling thinking I could do this? It was just that all that preemptive shame. And afterwards, wow, I felt like a peeled grape. And I'm just mentioning this, maybe it's braggadocio early, but like I did not expect a standing ovation and I got one. And I think that made me feel even more like of an imposter, like, why they're standing up. This was just like and you texted me after, Charlie, and just no judgment of what my experience was like. And I think that was just really helpful. Like, I didn't know polyvagal theory back then. I didn't know we were co-regulating, because even through text, you were able to just be present with what I was going through. I'm going to say it, Charlie, you had also texted me to listen to Dayenu, which I'll let you talk about and explain what that's about. And that in itself was kind of a
Well,
mantra that helped me
right.
cope.
Well, but let me first say something about standing ovations, which is I get a good 2 minutes of braggadocious pleasure before the shame sets in. So I think we should all, when we get praise, we should all kind of set a timer to see how long we can take it in. Um, yeah, so Dayenu is a lot of, it is one of the key words in the Passover Seder. There's a song, Dayenu, and it means literally, it would have been enough, or it is enough. And so this, I think, I'm trying to trace it back. I think it was around 2002. Was doing the show um, called Soup of the Day, which is a crazy experiment. David Ford and I, the challenge was we start with nothing, and then 10 days later, I go on stage with whatever we have created. And it turned out to be 7 or 8 really short monologues. And I think it was that show, after that show, that I was just, after the show, just going around and around and around and around. Why didn't I do this better? Oh, that wasn't right. And one of the people at the show that night was my friend, Rabbi Dorothy Richmond. And I was confiding in her that I couldn't stop obsessing about what I had failed to get exactly right. And, sort of just throwing this in her rabbinic lap. And she said, well, why don't you just say Dayenu? Um, and so that became a kind of post-show practice. Um, I do what people tell me to do. And she said, so what emerged, I don't remember exactly how it emerged, but I would go backstage after a show and close my eyes and just repeat the word Dayenu, Dayenu, Dayenu. It was not easy. It still is not easy. And so I created a crutch for myself, which is I had a watch with a timer, and I would set it to 7 minutes so that it was not infinite. And I just said Dayenu for 7 minutes. And as happens with a mantra, other thoughts pop up of, oh, that moment, I didn't hold in silence long enough for the audience. I went too fast. I stepped on that laugh. That word isn't right. This whole piece, the second half of it is flagging. All that stuff that's running around my head, it gets immediately I mean, the metaphor I came up with last time we talked about this was each of those thoughts, each of those obsessive thoughts that can verge into shame of not feeling good enough of what you've done. It's like that's a basketball bouncing off the backboard of Dayenu. And it cannot have the same power over you when it has to face this other, um, this word that becomes an antidote or a complement even. I mean, that's the thing that I also want to say is that, so if there's shame at that, I mean, there's shame at various points in the creative process. And Zadie, we need to talk about why it's not a bad. I mean, there's more to say about what Zadie Smith was saying. It's not a bad thing, but there's shame. Oh, why? How dare I write? There's shame of I did this thing, and that sentence is not right, and it's in print, or an audience has seen it. Oh, where can I go hide? Um, there's all of that stuff. Um, and now I've lost my train of thought. Um, because it keeps coming around and around and around. Um, and I guess one thing that occurs to me as I'm speaking now is that if we budget in, kind of create a shame budget, it's going to come. at various stages in the creative process and not to feel shame about the shame, but to say, oh, yeah, here it comes. Of course it's happening. Why wouldn't it happen? Oh, that's where I was heading before the train of thought got off the rails. Is that we we get a message from the shame. Let's say I've just done a show and I think I stepped on that laugh, or this piece of this scene, I didn't get that character. I still haven't figured out that character. In that post-show moment, you want to have Dayenu. But if that's Saturday night, on Tuesday, when you come back to the show, there's information there. It gets tied up with the shame, but it's like, actually, that moment does need some work. That could be better. There could be fruitful obsession about making that beat better. That's the thing that's so difficult, is to tease apart the fact that you're beating yourself up and should just be grateful that you were able, that you had the strength and you got through the show, and something maybe, your courage, and if something came back from the audience, this is a miracle that human beings can think of something, can speak it, other human beings can hear it, something can go on, and the energy between us. This is a miracle that this kind of communication is possible. But there's to have Dayenu have the miracle and then say, what did I learn? What are the questions that I come away from this moment with that I want to open up and do more with? So and this never ends. But trying to find a place for each of those, for that signal, for what different ways of working with that signal of it could be better.
Charlie, if you're comfortable, would you maybe share like a story or experience where maybe you went through this like on a show and how you sought support? And since we're kind of in a Jewish thread right now, like maybe with Rabbi Sam that you worked on.
Actually, the story that comes to mind is from the People's Violin. And there was one moment, this is a show in which I played 20 characters without costume change. And it was anyway, so there's this one moment and it's framed as a documentary film, and the documentary filmmaker is interviewing this older man about something that happened 50, 60 years ago, which was a traumatic, violent moment when somebody came and smashed a piece of crystal on his parents' mantelpiece. And it was anti-Semitic. And so he tells his story. And I couldn't sit in that pause long enough because it's very difficult to stay in silence. And so I'd get off stage and I'd think, I didn't do it. I didn't go all the way into that moment. And I felt like I'm not doing justice to this moment. And then I made the choice mechanically to count first to 5, the next show, count to 5 in silence. And then I pushed it to 7, and then I pushed it to 10. So that's, a little example of taking that message and actually using it to improve the work. Was that what you were asking about?
And with their experiences of shame, I'm hearing like a positive version of it. If you're comfortable sharing, like, what was that experience for you? And did you seek out support to get to the next phase of
Right. So that show was the most difficult experience of my artistic life. It was a huge hit. It was the most daring piece I'd ever done. I put 3 years of my life into it. Oh, just working. And then it became a big hit. And I was just a mess. I couldn't sleep. I was in anxiety all day long until I was on stage, at which point I was fine. Um, and the relentless work of 3 years. Um, but what the shame was in well, this was a hit show, which was selling out weeks or months in advance. The shame was, what's wrong with me that I can't enjoy success? Which led on to a whole bunch of other what's wrong with me's, and just a very difficult um, feeling like a failure because I couldn't handle success, as well as the toll this show was taking on me physically and emotionally. So that was the year 2000. 9 years later, I'm doing another kind of full length 2-act show, many characters. The first act was an hour, the second act was 55 minutes, and I just didn't know if I could. It was again physically very taxing, and it was coming up to opening night, and I thought, I don't want to go down the tubes again. And I had the idea of calling Rebecca Fisher. Now, Rebecca Fisher, some of you guys know, she's absolutely brilliant artist and the most generous, warm soul. And she and I have a strong connection. And I worked up my courage and I said, Rebecca, would you be my support person as I embark on this run of Rabbi Sam? Uh, I noticed I was beginning to have the doubts and the shame, and I knew they could kind of take over. So I asked her, and she said yes. And so I would, whenever I was beginning to feel the struggle, I would email her or text her, or sometimes we would have phone calls. And that being witnessed when I was in the deepest or on the brink, what I feared would be, just shame, doubt, I can't do this, incompetence, all of that stuff, or I'm being judged, or it's not going well, and all that stuff, I would externalize it. And Rebecca didn't have to say much. And then it got to the point of I didn't even need to text her. I just thought of her. I had my little Rebecca on my shoulder, and I'd think it, and I'd hear what she would have to say, or just how she would listen. And it really did help. I want you to talk, Kenny, about what it's like for you after you have, like the day after you've performed.
I have a vulnerability hangover, and I think, oh, I misspoke in the beginning. 15 years ago is when Charlie and I actually started directing. And I would say, and I bring this up because I think probably maybe 8 years in, Charlie got a sense of my nervous system before and after. And on the last shows I've been working on before the pandemic, Charlie would say, you're going to have attacks for doing this work because how truthful you want to be here and the amount of inner life you're expressing, you're going to pay attacks. And I was like, I've been performing, I'm fearless on stage. And then the next day, I called in sick to work after the piece that I'm referring to. And I just felt like a peeled grape, and it just felt so raw. And I've been in therapy for most of my life and in recovery community, so it's hard for me to talk about this without using that language. So I felt very dysregulated. I felt kind of a unsafe, I don't want to use inner child, but an unsafe younger self, just really activated, not feeling safe, not feeling secure. And through these iterations of going through this, and I was able to again, communicate with Charlie, and then I have people in my recovery communities who are trusted that I can share everything to, and they're not going to try to fix me or rescue me, but they were present with me in a somatic way where they can feel and hear what I'm saying and be present with it. And then sometimes, if they were called, share their own experiences, even if it was not in performing. So these days we call it co-regulating in trauma therapy language. So people that could witness what I went through and then co-regulate with me really helped me through it. but that did not make it go away. And I say this because trying to make our different inner states change to me is like the root of addiction. But they were present with me, and I had a sense of security, and then it eventually passed. And I want to abstract this a little bit because David talks about the difference between therapy and performing. And I've done some drama therapy training, and there are different transactions when we do solo performance. We're there for the audience and to connect with them and give them an experience. But when we're dealing with like shame and these other things off stage, it's hard not to pull in from spiritual practices or therapy. And in the current trauma therapy models, so much of it is about just coming back to what is our somatic state, and then being present with another who can hold that with us, not fix us, but co-feel that with us. So looking back, that is what I've experienced with people I trust in the solo performance community, like Charlie, who's been able to be there for me during those states, and then people in my healing type and spiritual communities. I hope that answers that, Charlie.
Yeah, I mean it's such it there's no fix. Which is like kind of like life. Um, you know, but I felt foolish that it took me so long to realize that after, there's like you're doing a solo Sundays, you're doing this incredibly vulnerable work. I mean, the stuff you were doing about violence against Asian Americans and the places you went. This is just a couple of years ago. And it's like, of course, the next day it's going to be very difficult because if you've gone to these deep places, and I would parenthetically say, I think this is a little bit different than the actor playing Hamlet because it's your own soul, your own experience. So, yeah, of course, the next day, and like, okay, of course, I have to text Kenny and say, how is it going? So that if you can, find somebody who proactively reaches out to you and says, expecting that it's going to be difficult. You talk about the tax on the artist. There are works each of us does that are more and less vulnerable. When you were doing your Kim Jong-un piece, um, it was playful. I don't think that cost you the same thing when I was doing Feisty Old Jew. It was, it was not taking me to the depths, and it was not physically taxing. And there are times in our life where we want to do stuff that is, or we're compelled to do stuff that is more raw and more difficult, and to put in the time to try to go to those deep places. And then there's times where it's like, I'm going to do some comedy now. Um, there sometimes is this sort of bravado thing of I must I must probe to the depths. And yeah, if you're called to do that, if that's the moment, um, yes. And then there's other times where we're not in the place. We don't have the resources to go to those vulnerable places, or we'd rather do other stuff. I want to say a little bit more. Go ahead.
Try this. Oh, if you want to say more, go ahead. I was feeling like
No,
this.
my brain was moving on to bravado.
Yeah, this feels like a transition point because it feels like we've been in the stew of shame. We find ways to find security, safety, co-regulating through therapeutic, recovery, spiritual models, tools, etc. Can we talk a little bit more about the obsession and the bravado? Because I want to say, Charlie, your success is sold out shows multiple times, the Chronicle highest reviews you can get. You've carried this into your directing. You've been nominated multiple times by Theater Bay Area. You've won a TBA award for directing Dan Hoyle. So do you want to say anything else about the obsession about that part, or you want to go into the bravado? Because
Yeah,
I think we talked about that, like when we're dysregulated, we need to find a way to get regulated and come back into our adult bodies. And with these adult bodies and the adult kind of sensibilities, we want to improve what we just
I would like to use a different term than dysregulated. I would like to use the very scientific term out of whack. Um, so obsession. The downside of obsession for me is that when I'm deep in a play that I'm writing or directing, and with all of its, convoluted and complex parts of it, but even when I'm working on a 5-minute comic bonbon, if I'm doing my job right as a playwright, my brain is going there over and over and over again. Sometimes 10 times in a conversation I claim to be having with another human being, my brain is actually going to this other place. And so the downside of that is that when I am deep in obsession, I'm less present for my family and my friends. And that is inexcusable, and I'm working on it. And I've been working on it for decades. And so that's the downside. The good side is the play can get better. The comedy can get better because, if I shave this word here and get that syllable out there, and this can be, I mean, it can be very difficult, but I have, in the past few months, been walking through Noe Valley, becoming Alan Watts or, Studs Terkel or Bernie Sanders, and just hearing this thing and the most joyous obsession of my life of, solving little problems, discovering jokes. So I have a very complex relationship with obsession. And and then there's the stuff of obsessing about whether anybody's going to come and the reviewers and am I going to make enough money with it? That's also pretty pathological. Anything you want to say about obsession?
I think you've said it well. I think
But where did I put it? I made this little flow chart of the shame to obsession to bravado cycle. So the shame, not the post work shame, but the Zadie Smith, how dare I inflict 400 pages of my novel on anybody? So, and she sees this and it was David Ford who sent me that Zadie Smith interview. And we'll send you a link. You should watch the whole thing. But that idea that shame is productive, for me, one of the things that means is if I'm going to inflict 400 pages or even 5 minutes on anybody, I want to do the best work I can. So shame motivates me to delve, to obsess. And then at some point I say, oh, boy, is this good. This is great. And I start puffing up my chest and selling it. I'm trying to get a grant from this foundation. Oh, man, this is going to be great. And the story that I want to tell about this that I almost did not hear is so after this, Rush Limbaugh Night School became this big hit, kind of put me on the map theatrically. And I wanted to do this next show with Ralph Nader's Missing with 4 actors. And it was, going to cost money because you have to pay equity actors equity rates, which you should. It's big Megillah. And so I got a couple of people who helped me with this. And we set out the goal of raising $70,000 to mount this production. And the way you do that is with investors. And to get the investors, you have a brunch, and you have the brunch at the house of a very wealthy person. And on the walls of the house of this wealthy person, there is the Picasso and the Matisse. And there are how did I get here? There's waiters in bow ties and stuff, and they're serving, little things, and people are eating, and you're telling them that this great success, you just sold out 5 months of Rush Limbaugh's Nice, you're giving them, that's what's going to happen with this show. You're making a ridiculous promise, and this is not who I am, but I wanted to do it to fulfill this artistic desire and ambition. And that's a difficult bravado. And some people, it's not so hard. I think everything we're saying is not generalizable. There are people who have don't have these issues, have them differently. But for me, that memory of being so uncomfortable, um, but feeling like I needed to have that bravado or that braggadocio. Um, but it got me, it's part of how we got the money. Didn't get the money, aren't able to do the show, aren't able to do the show. I don't learn the next things of what worked and what didn't. I don't grow to the next level as an artist. And I don't, in other words, if I can learn the things I can learn because had the bravado to ask for that money, then I can pass those things on as a teacher and as a director and as a coach. So that's a tricky one that I don't know what to do with that. So the bravado can lead to fruitful learning that you wouldn't otherwise have. So
Here's what I'm hearing. And I want
no,
to
go ahead.
tie it back, Charlie, and I want to tie it back to Zadie, where she was saying like shameless can result in being dangerous. So what I'm hearing is that there is like a healthy sense of shame that allows us to then step back into the obsession or working on our art or craft. And then the more we work on it, the more we can get the artistic, iterative development from it. That gives us a healthy sense of bravado because, as Zadie was saying, most the artists she knows are introverted. We need some of that. We need a healthy sense of pride because we have to market our work. We have to.
Right. And what she's talking about, introverted artists, these impediments that keep us from sharing our work, um, these impediments, I think, often correlate with where we stand in the society in terms of things like race, class, and gender. So the number of older women I've worked with who do not think their work is good enough, and I know it is brilliant and I want to give it to the world, it breaks my heart. And I know a lot, and I do not see this as much with men of that generation. So that, I mean, Zadie Smith opens it up with introverted, and there a lot of us artists are. That's a whole other webinar. But let me put this, see if we can get this up on the screen. So I tried to boil it down into a proposition, with the caveat that there's much more to it than that. But obsession can lead to deeper, stronger work. What do you have to say about bravado? Or braggadocio. I'm using them interchangeably.
It's hard for me and it's hard for the people I've worked with. And it's very extreme. It's this can't take a compliment, try to control what is being expressed and experienced by brushing it off or discounting the compliments. And then in private, puffing myself up where no one can see me. And then that way, my Catholic upbringing, my family's cultural sense of exaggerated modesty is not in control. And then in secret, I can read Facebook or whatever, where people might have complimented me, and then I can experience it in a very dysregulated, childlike, black and white way. So again, I think this comes back to who was there that I can trust and get some honest feedback. Not that night, not the day after, but afterwards. And then what are places where they can give me some feedback? So the last time I performed was at Jeremy Greco's Sea Level several months ago. And Jeremy and Mark McColdrick, who's been doing this a long time, he's now teaching, etc. I asked him for some feedback and he was able to give me feedback that was not personal, that was not an opinion, but his experience of the artistic elements and where improvements could be made. So that was very helpful, and that helped me come back to I feel good. I tried new work, and now I feel good. I know what to work on next. So
And yeah. Did those comments come immediately after the show, or when did you get the feedback?
I asked for the feedback several days afterwards because in my work with you and with others, we need that space to
Yeah,
recover.
yeah, yeah. The more vulnerable the work, the more time you need. This isn't just possible hypothesis. The more vulnerable the work, the more time you need afterward to recover before you can hear anything. And one of the worst things, this was one of the toughest experiences I've had, was I was doing a work in progress of Rabbi Sam at Berkeley Hillel. So it's probably like 2008 or something like that. And there was no backstage, right? So there's, I don't know, 30, 40 people there. And I was doing this, unfinished, but pretty far along piece, which is taxing emotionally and physically. And there's no place for me to go. And so the show ends, and two people came up to me, people I know, and they said stupid shit, really shallow, awful, just like, and I had nowhere to go. And it, it was the most jarring post-show experience. And I was just knocked down for a couple months. And then I thought, how do I get going on this again? And I knew intellectually this shouldn't knock me down. These are just people it's misplaced. When people are excited about something, I can get excited and say really foolish stuff because I don't have words, or, it's like the energy is, this is something exciting, and then nonsense comes out of your mouth. So, but for me to recover from that, it took a couple months. And then I thought, who really gets this show? Who do I trust? And the name, what came up was Janice Plotkin. So I said to Janice, would you be up for just coming and sitting in a room and I do the whole piece for you? And she said yes, and I did, and I was able to recover and get back on the horse. So I do feel really strongly about being very clear about what kind of feedback you want, what you don't want, and whether you want any at all. And this is very important and very difficult. I mean, even in this in classes, like somebody is working on a piece and immediately somebody's excited and they blurt out, and I have to say, no, we're not giving feedback yet. And you don't get to write this person's piece for them. As excited as you are, as brilliant as your idea is, you don't get that. It's not your turn. And maybe never will be, and maybe not yet. But really curating how we give feedback, and thinking about the consequences. I want to talk. We should get to questions, but I want to put one more proposition up because I boiled it down to its essence. Think of braggadocio as a garment you put on and can take off so that it can be a mindful choice. And you deploy that part of yourself as wisely as you can. Um, so there's that. Anything else before we open it up, Kenny?
I think that's a good space to end.
Okay. How do we do this? People raise their hands. What do you want to do, Kenny?
That sounds good.
Let me unspotlight us. Actually, I'll leave the spotlights on. Jason, you've got your hand up.
Thank you very much. I love this. There's one thing that has just come up for me, which is ego, where I think you're talking around the role of pride and ego in all of this. Like sometimes it feels like that's sort of the core of this working element here is the me, the self, the part of me that's like trying to integrate with what's out there. And I just wonder if you could say a few words about how, shame obsession and this whole theme for me is about how I can remove myself from it, like be myself, but also remove myself. So I wonder if you could say a few words about ego and whether or not that has come up for you in this in a significant way.
Kenny? I'm not sure. For me, ego and, it's like there's the ego of the craftsman. There's the ego of I'm excited about these ideas. There's the ego that is competitive that says, and in I've a lot of stuff about I'm doing something nobody has ever done. Um, I am a pioneer. Um, and that's part delusional and part useful because it motivates me to try stuff I might not otherwise try. Um, but there's, and then the ego and the bravado, I don't know, can't tease those apart. Um, but I'm not sure I'm understanding what you're asking entirely.
I think it's just more a filter of what it is that what part of us is motivated by performing and sharing. Like what do we hope to get out of it as a feeling of connection? So like, I put myself out. I sort of have to put my ego is necessary to get me out there in a way because I have to be bravado and I have to be able to have courage. But then at the same time, my ego gets in the way because it starts to bring in all the little things that are they're just not they're not authentic. They're actually to me they're not the authentic thing that's really supposed to happen. So I think I'm just struggling with language, but each of these terms you've suggested feel very connected to that thing that feels really difficult for me. Like, and I don't know. I'll take it off the air. I just feel like the ego came up for me as like, wow, pride and ego is part of this, and that's where I got a little hung up.
Yeah, thank you for your question, Jason. I think there could be like multiple webinars on this one, but I think you named it. It's how to have a healthy amount to get on stage, and then afterwards to go through the ups and downs, and then get back to the improvement.
Right. And this is going to be different for everybody. I mean, there are artists who have done incredible work that is only seen after they die, and who had no need to show it to anybody. And that's, that's part of this world too. And we're all in different places with that. And you're hearing Kenny and me, and we're two two artists. We're in this. I don't want to say this is the way. It just everybody finds their own path. Carrie, you had a question.
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks. This is fabulous conversation. I I'm not quite sure how to frame the question, so I'm going to just stumble through it. There's thanks. There's something about this idea of shame or braggadocio that I feel I feel like when I'm writing my best work, I'm not even part of it. I'm like this vessel, and the words are coming through, and if they connect, yay. And I often feel like, when I get some praise, I feel like saying, it's not me, it's that thing I made. And that's when I'm trying to pick a project or decide to invest. Like you said, the obsession piece resonates really loudly because I know I'm on it when I'm just completely obsessed, and I love getting into that niche where it is all I'm thinking about, even when I shouldn't be. But I feel like there's a sense of being in service, right, to our audience and our readers and our listeners. That's what makes the rest of it worthwhile. And fuck this thing about shame, because that's just another way of getting in the way of it. And I think that was a question, but I'm not sure what it was.
Well, it's very important, and I feel a bit ashamed that I didn't think of it. Um, no, that's it, isn't it? Is that when we get ourselves in somehow find way into a creative process, um, great stuff finds us. And we are, I don't, you could call it a channel or, and, it's, if whatever it takes to get us there, if we can be present when it is and realize that is not purely us that is doing this, and that there is something else happening. So thank you for that.
Thanks for this. It's awesome.
Julie, oh, Nancy, you had your hand up for a while.
Yes, thank you to both of you for being so present and personal with all of this. And I related, Charlie, greatly to what you said about the critical comments that came immediately when you performed at the temple in Berkeley. But because I am so self-critical. So if somebody criticizes me, it's just horrible. But I remember when I was trying to work on a play and I got similarly two bad reactions. And I shared with a writing friend and he said, well, so what? So you now have the two worst criticisms. You know what the two worst could be. So now you go back to look for the positive ones. And I think that's easier said than done. But I do remember that sometimes. So now you've had the worst, go forward. Sort of like life right now. The outer world. I lived in LA, so these fires have really, really, really hit home. The house I lived in Altadena is burned. So it's been a very emotional,
Wow.
even though I haven't been there for 37 years, it was my house. So it's been an emotional week. So to put all that together with personal work, it's a process.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you.
Thank you, Nancy.
Charlie, I would like to respond. And first, Nancy, thank you for what you shared and for being present with us today. What I am hearing with you and also with Carrie, to me, a little bit of a through line is that this is kind of a communal, I don't want to say obligation, but maybe agreement or intention is that can we actually, as a community, so it's not just the teachers, but as a group, a community, create a safe container where we're going to try to witness each other so people can feel very seen and heard and experienced, and then reflect back in a way that's truly going to, or try our best to be of service so that they can grow artistically and they keep coming back to the class or the workshop or the reading or to the show. How can we as a collective have this kind of commitment to each other? So it's not just on Charlie or David or me or Mark Enway,
Right.
but on everybody. And we're going to commit to this, to each other's growth. We're going to focus on the growth. And also in my experience, and there are people here I've worked with and Charlie has worked with and we've worked with together, I've seen them grow from us giving encouragement and also focusing on what needs to get improved. I've never seen anyone grow from us giving just negative criticism.
Right.
Sometimes they might experience it that way despite our intentions, and they have not come back to our workshops before. So I think this is a communal agreement. Charlie, anything?
Yeah. I'm glad we're having this part of the conversation because, and I don't think this is that different from other parts of life, but there is opportunity for growth. I mean, so artistically, one of the things, here's a little story. So there was one moment I was sitting in the, rehearsal room, Dan Hoyle's on the stage. And for those of you who've seen his work, his physical work is just phenomenal. And I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, and for me, it's all this fun. It's like I get to play with these toys that I can't play with because I don't have that ability. It's like, oh, can we slow that down? Can you make it bigger? All this, craft stuff. And I'm also thinking, damn, I can never do anything anywhere like that, feeling my own limitations. But then the thought came, I can still learn something from this and take the step that I can take. And I guess I'm telling this story because to see in every moment where the opportunity is for growth And it's like, oh, I'm never, this is never going to be the, the the greatest gift I have, but I can get a little bit better. And what you're saying, Kenny, about um, a kind of gentle way of not slamming people with "you're no good, this is terrible," but saying, "Oh, here's this little place. You want to play here, and maybe see what you discover and grow." And I do feel that the artistic and craft development that we experience also is either mirrored in how it enlarges us as human beings, or sometimes even leads us, so that the craft is the probe. By having to work within the constraints of something you're writing or something you're presenting on stage, it's like, actually, we need a little bit more about this character in this moment and what's happening in their body. And that, or whatever it is, can open a door where you discover something you did not know, or experience something you haven't experienced, and actually become a slightly different human being, both in the writing and in the presenting or performing part. And that is a lot of why I do this, is because what I might discover, and part of it is because of the demands of the craft. Julie, you have a question.
Unmute. Okay. First, I just wanted to share something very quickly about shame, because I do a lot of work with emotions and where they are in the body. And one of the things I discovered is that shame, humiliation, guilt, and embarrassment all have the same root, and they are the root of need, of a deep need for other human beings. And so sometimes when you feel one of these emotions, if you can go inside your bone marrow and just feel the need, it creates some clarity around that and less spinning. So I just wanted to share that for everybody as that's something they might want to try to do. But for me, Charlie, I'm so grateful for this, because it reminds me of how much I love performing, which I haven't done for years now, except for some very vulgar rap songs I've written that I performed occasionally at an open mic. And it's made me want to go into, but Charlie, because I tried to expand a piece I'd done in your class to a long solo performance piece, that our sessions just didn't end up feeling like therapy sessions because the emotions were so intense for me. And every time I would come up with a new little piece, there would be almost an unexplored emotion I had to go into. So, what I would like, because I'm feeling very much more drawn into this now from this and from listening to you and Kenny and everybody else, is how you can work with that when you choose something sort of out of innocence and think, I would like to perform this, I would like to do this, and the emotions are so profound, that you just it starts to become unperformable around that.
Oh, if I had an answer for that question. Yeah, I mean, sometimes the discoveries are liberating and joyous, and sometimes they take us into places that are very difficult and that we hadn't anticipated. And I guess the only thing I can say is to do it cautiously, and to, when possible, give the artist a chance to pause, chance to say, actually, what I need emotionally and for my mental health is not to do this right now, or to do it with extra time for my soul to catch up with what the art is leading me toward. This is a very important and very fraught question. And the work, when you're doing it right, often leads you deeper and deeper and deeper. And some of that is very difficult. And then doing it on stage and being exposed with I mean, this is what we're talking about with your stuff, Kenny, is like you're talking about very deep stuff, and the world needs it in a way, right? Because we need to have the depths. I mean, this is one of my favorite lines that David uses, is people go to the theater to remember what life is because they're too busy living it. And when you distill and sculpt and go to the deeper places, it's a gift. It can be a real, if it's done well and beautifully and does not use the audience as your therapist. If it's done that way, you are giving a gift. I mean, how many times have we come out of a movie or a play or read a book and said, "Oh, thank you. Yes, this is what life is." And it's somehow invigorating and reviving, but we often fail to recognize what it has cost the artist. So I feel like tread very, very carefully in these areas, and particularly when it's one person on stage to just, you know, not not place yourself in harm's way unnecessarily or without being clear and without having sufficient support.
I would say there are multiple truths here, and I want to honor yours, Julie, because I've been in New York for the last 7 months training. I have not seen emotions that are not performable. We have been encouraged to perform at extreme intensity, our inner life, including with our bodies. And at some point of doing this and the exhaustion comes, we start finding poetic space and aesthetic distance, where then that becomes material we can shape consciously with our full beings. And it is gorgeous and beautiful and powerful and truthful here. So I would love, this is what I look for. There are people here who know this is how I work with them. I want this inner life fully embodied and as theatricalized as possible, because we're not doing therapy and we're not going to hold the audience captive and dump on them. We need to have some poetic space and aesthetic distance. But how can we not censor our intensity and express our entire humanness? But to Charlie's point, which I've learned from him, we have to do it with obsession. We need to keep iterating through our craft and the technical aspects of it. But I would say, I hope you work with Charlie, Julie, because I think you'll find a way with him on this. And I want to come see it when
We've
you
worked a bunch together already. Yeah.
keep working with Charlie. And if not, let's talk later in the future. I'm interested in our full emotional expression. So thank you for your question. We'll
Okay.
move on.
I think one more question. Pearl, you wanted to ask a question, and then we've gone an hour already. Thank you for hanging in with this and for being part of it. And we'll hear from Pearl, and then Kenny and I will do a little, just show you what we're working on and what we are offering for those who want to work with us. So Pearl.
Yes, hi. I just like to say, gosh, thank you guys so much. Charlie, Kenny, this is a gift. And I always feel sometimes as solo performers, we don't get gifted too often. I, it seems like to me when I was listening to the wonderful woman that shared um, her information to people. It was one of my things was running out of time, you know, and torture, exhaustion, and fear. And I say to myself, why am I doing this? Why am I beating myself up? But what it is that the gift, like you're saying, that artists get up on stage and they share. I felt a little bit, I get something from artists every time they get off stage, you know. So that's all I wanted to say. It's yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah. So
That's a pretty great note to end on. Let me share this one thing just so you know what we've got going. Thank you so much, Pearl. We are lucky to have you. We're lucky to have all of us in this little community of artists. Really feel so lucky to be with you and going through time together. Okay, here's what we're up to in case you need us, want us. Kenny, you want to talk about what you're up to these days?
Sure. I've been in New York and Philly learning about physical theater-based devising. it's non-hierarchical, but at some point, a director does need to kind of push things along. So I'm interested in devising, using our bodies, using our inner life and our imaginations to start creating work and to do it together, although the person, it's their story, their show, and then also directing. I'm interested in uncensored art where we're going to speak our truth from as deep as possible and also make it funny and moving, because I'm in the recovery world. I'm in a lot of spaces. I hear a lot of unguarded truth. This is what I want to make aesthetically and artistically on stage. We do not censor ourselves, but we put in the work so that it's artistic at the same time. And it's going to be hard, but this is what I'm interested in.
Great. Well, I am getting tremendous joy from coaching and mentoring people. Whatever, I'm doing a lot of work, not just in performance, but people writing memoirs. So I'm available for coaching, mentoring in person in San Francisco or via Zoom. I've got a new coaching package, which has emerged partly out of conversation with Kat Meltzer. Thank you, Kat. You get 4 sessions plus a performance at a small salon that I have started in San Francisco. So it's a way to get your work in front of a small, to kind of give yourself a push and have a deadline to work, do a piece before a small audience and learn more about it if you're getting ready for a fringe festival or something like that. And then I'm starting a storytelling class on February 3rd. Anyway, which I'm excited about, kind of blur. What is solo performance? What is storytelling? And I like Kenny, am also very interested in comedy right now. That's where my own writing is going, is into these comic audio bonbons. But yeah, that's what I'm up to. We're going to put links and information. Everybody will get an email, a follow-up email, and you'll have all this information along with a link to the Zadie Smith video, a recording here, so you can take it in, you can share it. And if you did not get an email, if you're somehow not on the list that got the reminder emails, if you signed up late, just send Kenny or me an email and we can get you looped in.
I'm going to say just thank you to everyone who's been attending. If there are other folks here from Southern California, our hearts are with you. And, there's a lot happening, so thank you. And I think this is one way to come together and also find ways to start creating stuff artistically with whatever we go through. And Charlie and I were pretty sensitive. We can feel like how present y'all have been for this. And that, as Pearl was saying, that is a gift to both of us and to each other. So thank you so much.
Are
we allowed to clap yet?
No, not yet. I just want to, I generally at the beginning contextualize anything in terms of the times and moment that we are living in. And I feel, a lot of you know that I've done a lot of electoral work this cycle. And I feel like we need to stay alert to how we can be of use in what is a extremely difficult political moment. And I also think we need to keep making art. And for the sake of our own hearts and also for the gift that we can give, it is more needed than ever for us to do to make art and savor making art and savor this good part of life and being human. So, all right. Yeah, and actually Alan, who's on this call, we had this conversation. I was coaching Alan on this wonderful piece he's doing, and we both, very political people, and I said, is it okay? Is it okay for us? The world is falling apart? And we agreed. We had such a great rehearsal. And we said, yeah, actually, it's more than a guilty pleasure. It really is. It's important. So let's try to keep all of that in mind. All right. Yes, now you may clap, and we'll try not to be ashamed.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Bravi, bravi, bravi.
Thank you so much. It was wonderful.
Thank
Mm.
you.
Onward.
Yes.
See you down
Excelsior.
the road.
Great
Inspiring.
session. Love it. Love it. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Yeah.